A security guard jumped on a grenade to save a crowd, but the military's response 1 week later shocked the entire nation. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Michael Donovan adjusted the volume on his security radio with trembling hands. The fine drizzle dampened his uniform and matched his mood perfectly. Stationed at the eastern perimeter of the Veterans Memorial, he scanned the growing crowd with practiced vigilance, his eyes never lingering in one place for too long. 22 years of military service had ingrained habits that his current job as a security guard couldn't erase. He winced as he shifted his weight, an old knee injury flaring up in the damp weather. Or perhaps it was just age catching up to him at 47. Either way, it was the least of his discomforts today. Why do you insist on wasting your life watching over people who don't even know you exist? Emma's words from last night's argument echoed in his mind, sharper than any physical pain. His 16-year-old daughter had a knack for finding the most vulnerable spots in his armor. What made it worse was that he had no good answer for her. Michael glanced at his watch. 0907 hours. The main ceremony wouldn't start until noon. 5 more hours of standing in the rain, 5 more hours until he could go home and try to repair things with Emma, if she would even speak to him. Before leaving that morning, he'd left a handwritten note on the kitchen table. "Everything I do for you." It felt inadequate even as he wrote it, but words had never been his strength. "All units, sound check on the main stage. Maintain positions," crackled his radio, jolting him back to the present. "Copy that, Command. East perimeter secure," he responded automatically. Michael watched a group of elderly veterans being escorted to the VIP seating area. He straightened instinctively, a soldier's respect for those who had served before him. One of the old men, probably a Vietnam vet judging by his cap, caught Michael's eye. For a brief moment, there was a flash of recognition. Not of Michael personally, but of what he represented. The old soldier gave an almost imperceptible nod before being guided to his seat. That tiny acknowledgement affected Michael more than it should have. He touched the small military pin on his security uniform lapel, his only personal concession to his past service. Most days it felt like those 22 years had happened to someone else. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Michael checked it quickly, against protocol. A text from Catherine, Sarah's sister. "Did you and Emma make up? Call me when you can." Catherine had been their rock since Sarah died 3 years ago. Cancer took her in 6 months, leaving Michael alone with a traumatized 13-year-old daughter who barely knew him after his multiple deployments. He typed a quick, "We'll call later," and pocketed the phone, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. The Memorial Plaza was filling up now, families with children, politicians seeking photo opportunities, military brass in full uniform. All the things Michael never had or had lost along the way. He watched a father lift his young daughter onto his shoulders so she could see better, and the ache in his chest intensified. A brief flash of memory. Emma, at 4 years old, perched on his shoulders during his welcome home parade after his second Afghanistan tour. Her tiny hands gripping his ears, her delighted giggles above him. That was before everything changed, before the nightmares started, before Sarah got sick, before Emma began to realize her father was more ghost than man. The radio crackled again. "Rodriguez checking in. West perimeter is secure and boring as hell." Michael almost smiled. Rodriguez was the opposite of him. Young, talkative, treated security work as just a paycheck between college semesters. "Copy that, Rodriguez. Stay alert," Michael responded. "Come on, Donovan, lighten up. This show's gonna be a drag, partner. Nothing ever happens at these things." "Until it does," Michael muttered, but not into the radio. The rain intensified slightly, and Michael adjusted his position to keep a better view of the crowd. Mentally, he calculated evacuation routes, assessed potential choke points, scanned for suspicious packages, old habits that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours. A catering van pulled up near the rear entrance, and Michael watched as the staff unloaded equipment. He noted the driver's ID badge, the proper uniform, the scheduled delivery time. All correct, but he kept watching anyway. An SUV with government plates arrived, disgorging a group of suited officials flanked by actual Secret Service agents. Michael felt the familiar pang of being the second-tier security, the rental cops hired to fill out the perimeter, while the real professionals handled the VIPs. His radio chirped. "Donovan, take a sweep through Sector 4. We've got some kids climbing on the memorial statues." "Copy that. Moving to Sector 4. Michael walked briskly, his eyes never stopping their continuous scan of faces, hands, packages. He reached the bronze statue of soldiers raising a flag and firmly but gently directed several children back to their parents. "Sorry, sir," a harried father said, collecting his rambunctious son. "He's just excited." "No problem. The viewing area is safer, though." Michael forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. As the family moved away, Michael checked his watch again. 1,003 hours. Still hours to go. He calculated how much overtime pay this would bring in. Maybe enough to fix Emma's laptop, like she'd been asking for months. The thought of Emma brought back last night's argument in full force. "You're not even living, Dad. You're just existing," she had shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Mom would hate seeing you like this." That had hit hardest because it was true. Sarah had always been after him, to pursue the engineering degree he'd talked about, to build something, create something. Instead, after her death, he'd retreated further into the comfort of routine and structure, taking the security job because it was what he knew, watching, waiting, being vigilant against threats that rarely materialized. Michael shook his head slightly, forcing himself back to the present. This wasn't the time for self-pity. He had a job to do, however meaningless Emma might think it was. His radio crackled to life again. "All units, be advised. VIP convoy approaching main entrance. Tighten perimeter." Michael moved to his assigned position, watching as black SUVs pulled up and more politicians emerged, waving to the modest crowd that had gathered despite the rain. He recognized a senator, a governor, and several high-ranking military officials. One of the generals paused before entering the memorial building, surveying the security setup with a professional eye. For a brief moment, his gaze landed on Michael, and there was no recognition at all, just the automatic assessment of a perimeter guard, a piece of the security furniture. The moment passed, and the general moved on, already engaged in conversation with an aide. Michael swallowed the bitter taste in his mouth. Once, he had been someone. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, decorated combat veteran, trusted with the lives of 12 men. Now he was just a uniform holding an umbrella, making sure no one crossed the yellow tape. The radio chatter increased as the event's start time approached. Michael maintained his position, his face a professional mask as he watched the crowd grow, now numbering several hundred despite the weather. Families huddled under umbrellas, veterans in their service caps, journalists setting up cameras under plastic tarps. Michael's gaze swept across them systematically, the way he'd been trained to scan for threats. Most were exactly what they appeared to be, ordinary citizens attending a patriotic event. But 20 feet to his left, something caught his attention. A man in his 30s wearing a gray jacket zipped up to his neck despite the mild temperature. Sweat beaded on his forehead even though it was barely 60 degrees. His eyes darted around too quickly, never settling, and his right hand kept returning to the black backpack slung over his shoulder. Michael watched him for 30 seconds, noting how the man checked his phone repeatedly but never seemed to read anything on it. How he would start moving toward the main stage area, then double back, as if working up the courage for something. Training and instinct merged into certainty. Something was wrong. Michael raised his radio. "Command, this is Donovan at East Perimeter. Possible suspect in Sector South, gray jacket, black backpack, exhibiting erratic behavior." After a moment's pause, the bored voice of the security supervisor responded. "Just observe and don't alarm the guests, Donovan. Probably just another protester." "He's moving toward the stage area," Michael insisted, already beginning to follow at a distance. "Maintain position, Donovan. We have enough personnel near the stage." Michael hesitated, years of following orders warring with the alarm bells ringing in his head. The man was now moving more purposefully, occasionally bumping into people as he navigated through the thickening crowd toward the main stage, where a children's choir was assembling for the opening performance. The suspect seemed to notice Michael's attention, his movements becoming more hurried as he pushed past a group of elderly veterans. "Rodriguez," Michael said into his radio, switching to a direct channel. "Gray jacket, black backpack, moving fast toward the northwest corner of the stage. Something's off." "I see him," came Rodriguez's reply, suddenly serious. "Want me to intercept?" Michael was already moving, protocol forgotten. "I'm approaching from the east. Be ready." The suspect was now practically running, shoving people aside. Several annoyed faces turned in his direction. The man reached into his backpack, and Michael's world narrowed to tunnel vision, everything happening in slow motion. 22 years of combat experience crystallized into absolute certainty when Michael recognized the metal object in the man's hand, an M67 fragmentation grenade, pin already pulled. Without thinking, Michael lunged forward, knocking aside 3 civilians as he shouted, "Evacuate! Everyone down!" The assailant threw the grenade toward the stage where the children's choir stood frozen in confusion. Rodriguez finally appeared from the other side, tackling the suspect with a flying tackle and deploying his taser. Michael's mind calculated in fractions of seconds. Too many people to evacuate. No safe place to throw the grenade. No time. In a flash, he saw Emma's face, then Sarah's, then the faces of his platoon members he couldn't save in Kandahar. Not again. Not on his watch. Michael jumped and caught the grenade mid-air, his body already turning to press the explosive against his abdomen, positioning it to direct the blast into himself, rather than outward, toward the crowd. "Grenade! Everybody down!" he roared as he curled around the explosive. An elderly veteran's eyes met his for a split second, a look of perfect understanding passing between them. Michael's last conscious thought was of the note he'd left for Emma that morning. "Everything I do for you." Michael Donovan abandoned his assigned position, cutting through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Years of combat had taught him to move through chaos like water, finding gaps, anticipating movement, always advancing. Rain pelted his face as his security cap fell off, but he didn't break stride. The suspect had noticed him. The man's eyes widened with panic, his movements becoming more frantic as he shoved an elderly couple aside. Michael's radio squawked, with his supervisor's voice demanding he return to position, but it sounded distant and irrelevant now. On the stage, the elderly general adjusted his reading glasses, leaning toward the microphone. Around him, children from veterans' families arranged themselves in neat rows, small American flags clutched in their hands. They were preparing to sing the national anthem, oblivious to the danger approaching. Michael's knee screamed in protest as he accelerated, but adrenaline dulled the pain. His eyes never left the suspect, who was now only 15 yards from the stage. The man's right hand disappeared into his backpack. "Evacuate!" Michael shouted again, his voice carrying across the memorial plaza. Heads turned in confusion, but few moved. Americans had become too accustomed to false alarms, to drills that never materialized into real danger. Time compressed into crystal clarity. Michael saw the man's arm emerge from the backpack, fingers wrapped around the distinctive oval shape of an M67 fragmentation grenade. But something was off. The standard olive drab color had been replaced with a metallic sheen. The grenade had been modified. In the millisecond he had to process this, Michael's combat experience supplied the meaning. Enhanced explosive, possibly with added shrapnel, deadlier than standard issue. The pin was already out. Rodriguez appeared from the other direction, finally comprehending the true threat. His young face hardened as he dropped his radio and sprinted toward the suspect. The man wound his arm back to throw. Michael calculated distances, trajectories, innocent lives. The children on stage, the elderly veterans in the front rows, the families packed tightly around the memorial. Too many people. No safe zone to evacuate them in the 5 seconds before detonation. No barrier to absorb the blast. Except one. As the grenade left the suspect's hand, arcing through the rain toward the stage, Michael launched himself into its path. He felt weightless for a moment, suspended between past and present, between failure and redemption. His fingers closed around the cold metal in midair. The grenade's safety lever had already detached. The countdown had begun. Behind him, Rodriguez tackled the suspect with a flying leap, driving him to the ground with a crack of breaking bone. The taser in Rodriguez's hand discharged with a sharp electrical snap. Michael landed hard on his bad knee, but maintained his grip on the grenade. His combat training took over completely, his body moving without conscious thought. He pressed the explosive tight against his abdomen, angling it to direct the blast into his own body rather than outward. A flash of memory. Sergeant Willis in basic training, drilling them on grenade protocols. In the worst-case scenario, you can minimize casualties by using your body to absorb the blast. It's a one-way ticket, soldiers, but you'll save everyone around you. Michael had never imagined he'd implement that particular training. "Grenade! Everybody down!" he roared, curling his body around the explosive as he dropped to the ground. The plaza erupted into chaos. People screamed and dove for cover. Security personnel drew weapons. The children on stage stood frozen until a quick-thinking choir director pulled them backward. An elderly veteran in the front row met Michael's eyes. The old soldier didn't panic or run. Instead, he nodded once, soldier to soldier, a look of perfect understanding and profound respect passing between them. In that moment, Michael wasn't a minimum-wage security guard. He wasn't a divorced father struggling to connect with his teenage daughter. He wasn't a failure or a disappointment. He was a soldier again, a protector, someone who mattered. Faces flashed through his mind in quick succession. Emma, as a toddler, reaching up with pudgy hands. Sarah on their wedding day, radiant in white. His mother, who hadn't lived to see him deploy. His father, who'd never approved of his military service. His platoon in Afghanistan. Some now dead, some broken, some lost to the system. Then Emma again as he'd seen her last night, tears streaming down her face as she shouted, "You're throwing your life away." Was he? Michael wondered in this final moment of clarity. Or was he finally using it for something that mattered? His last conscious thought settled on the note he'd left for Emma that morning. "Everything I do for you." Then time ran out. The explosion was surprisingly muted, absorbed as it was by Michael's body. Those nearest heard a dull thump rather than the expected blast, followed by a horrifying spray of blood. Rodriguez looked up from restraining the suspect just in time to see his colleague's sacrifice. "No!" he screamed, abandoning the now subdued attacker to rush to Michael's side. The crowd, initially stunned into silence, erupted into panicked screams. Some ran for the exits while others stood frozen in shock. Security personnel converged from all directions, weapons drawn, too late to stop what had already happened. Rodriguez reached Michael first, sliding to his knees beside the fallen security guard. What he saw made him gag despite his tough exterior. Michael's abdomen was a horrific mess of torn flesh and shattered bone. The blue security uniform was now a soaked crimson. "Medic!" Rodriguez screamed, pressing his hands against the worst of the wounds, knowing it was futile. "I need a medic now." The elderly veteran who had locked eyes with Michael pushed through the forming crowd, his weathered hands competently checking Michael's neck for a pulse. "He's still alive," the old soldier announced grimly, "but not for long without immediate evac." Around them, chaos continued to unfold. More security personnel arrived, securing the attacker and establishing a perimeter. Someone had the presence of mind to lead the children off the stage and into the memorial building for shelter. The politicians and military brass were being hurriedly evacuated through a back entrance. Rodriguez barely noticed any of it, his attention fixed on his dying colleague. "Hang in there, Donovan," he pleaded, though Michael was clearly unconscious. "Help is coming. Think about your kid, man. Think about Emma." At the mention of his daughter's name, Michael's eyelids fluttered momentarily. A bubble of blood formed at the corner of his mouth. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The rain continued to fall, diluting the expanding pool of blood beneath Michael's broken body. The elderly veteran had removed his jacket and was using it to stabilize Michael's head. "I served with the 10th Mountain," he said quietly to Rodriguez. "Saw men take grenades in Nam. Never saw anyone deliberately catch one." "Who is he?" "Just a security guard," Rodriguez answered, his voice cracking. "Just a fucking security guard with a teenage daughter." "No, son," the veteran corrected firmly. "That's a soldier." The first responders arrived then, professional and efficient, as they pushed Rodriguez aside and began working on Michael. Their faces told the story their words didn't. They were stabilizing a dying man for transport, not treating someone they expected to save. As they loaded Michael onto a stretcher, Rodriguez found himself holding something that had fallen from the wounded man's pocket, a crumpled security badge with Michael's impassive photo and, beneath it, a small, worn photo of a teenage girl with her father's eyes. Emma. Rodriguez clutched the items tightly as he watched the ambulance doors close on his colleague. He'd only known Donovan for 6 months, a quiet, competent co-worker who rarely spoke about himself and never complained. Rodriguez had found him boring, even pathetic sometimes, with his by-the-book approach and constant vigilance that seemed excessive for minimum-wage security work. Now he understood. Donovan had never stopped being a soldier. As law enforcement secured the scene and began interviewing witnesses, Rodriguez sat on a wet bench, staring at the blood on his hands. A detective approached, notebook ready. "You're the one who took down the suspect?" he asked. Rodriguez nodded numbly. "And the other guard? The one who—" The detective gestured vaguely, uncomfortable with articulating what they'd all witnessed. "Michael Donovan," Rodriguez said firmly. "His name is Michael Donovan." The detective wrote it down. "And he intentionally caught the grenade?" "He saw what was happening before anyone else did. He tried to warn everyone. When that didn't work, he—" Rodriguez's voice failed him. The detective waited, then asked, "Was he former military?" 22 years. Staff sergeant. Afghanistan, I think. Maybe Iraq, too. He didn't talk about it much. Next of kin. A daughter, Emma. 16, I think. And a sister-in-law named Catherine. His wife died a few years ago." The detective nodded, writing this down. "We'll need contact information." Rodriguez handed over Michael's security badge, but kept the photo of Emma. "I should be the one to tell her," he heard himself saying, though the thought terrified him. How do you tell a teenage girl that her father sacrificed himself to save strangers? Across the plaza, news crews had arrived and were filming from behind police lines. Rodriguez watched with growing anger as a reporter spoke into a camera, the memorial visible in the background. From what he could hear, they were focusing on the attack itself and the failure of security protocols, not on the man who had saved dozens of lives with his sacrifice. Just another invisible worker. Disposable, replaceable. Rodriguez clenched his fist around Emma's photo, making a silent promise to the man he'd underestimated. Donovan's sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten or minimized, not if he had anything to say about it. The rain had finally stopped, but a chill wind blew across the Memorial Plaza as emergency personnel continued their work. The injured were being treated, witnesses debriefed, evidence collected. The American flag that had been flying at full staff was now being lowered to half-mast by a solemn color guard. At the center of it all, a pool of diluted blood marked where Michael Donovan had fallen, where an ordinary man had made an extraordinary choice. The muted explosion echoed across the memorial, leaving an eerie silence broken only by distant screams and approaching sirens, while a pool of blood expanded beneath the hero who had fallen. Emma Donovan tapped her pencil rhythmically against her biology textbook, staring blankly at diagrams of cell division. Mr. Peterson droned on about mitosis at the front of the classroom, but his words floated past her like background noise. She hadn't been able to focus all morning, still replaying last night's argument with her father in her mind. The centromeres split during anaphase, Mr. Peterson said, drawing on the whiteboard. This allows the sister chromatids to... A chorus of electronic alerts interrupted him mid-sentence. Cell phones throughout the classroom chirped and vibrated simultaneously. Emma pulled her phone from her pocket, frowning at the emergency notification on the screen. Mr. Peterson paused, his marker hovering in the air. "Everyone, please!" The classroom speakers crackled to life with the principal's tense voice. "Attention all students and staff. There has been an incident at the Veterans Memorial downtown. Anyone with family members attending today's event should report to the front office immediately." Emma felt a cold wave wash over her. Her father was working security at the memorial today. The argument from last night flashed through her mind again. His tired eyes, her cruel words. "Why do you insist on wasting your life watching over people who don't even know you exist?" She hadn't meant it. Not really. She'd been frustrated and lashed out, the way she often did lately. Now those words hung in the air between them, unretracted. Emma gathered her books with trembling hands, aware of curious glances from classmates as she hurried from the room. In the hallway, other students were emerging from classrooms, some looking at their phones in shock. "There was a bombing," she overheard someone say. "Terrorist attack," said another. Emma broke into a run. The front office was already filling with anxious students when she arrived. Mrs. Chambers, the office secretary, looked up as Emma burst through the door. "My dad," Emma started, unable to finish the sentence. Mrs. Chambers' expression shifted from professional concern to personal alarm. "Your father was working at the memorial today?" Emma nodded, clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. She'd already tried calling him twice, straight to voicemail both times. "Take a seat, honey," Mrs. Chambers said gently. "We're contacting parents and guardians as quickly as we can." Emma sat rigidly in a plastic chair, refreshing news sites on her phone. The information was fragmented and contradictory. Some reports mentioned a grenade attack, others a bombing. Casualties were reported, but no specific numbers or names. 15 minutes passed like hours. Then the office door opened and Emma looked up to see her Aunt Catherine. Catherine still wore her hospital scrubs, her nurse's ID badge swinging from a lanyard around her neck. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She'd obviously been crying. Emma knew before a word was spoken. "Your father," Catherine began, her voice breaking. She didn't need to finish. The look in her eyes said everything. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Emma felt a strange disconnect, as if she were suddenly observing everything from a great distance. She was vaguely aware of being guided to Catherine's car, of meaningless reassurances being murmured, of the school building receding behind them. "Is he?" Emma finally managed to ask as they merged onto the highway. "He's alive," Catherine said quickly, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. "But it's bad, Em. Really bad. Traffic crawled toward the downtown hospital, emergency vehicles still racing past with blaring sirens. Catherine finally gave up on the main entrance, using a staff parking pass to access a side lot. The emergency department was chaos. Ambulances continued to arrive, disgorging patients on stretchers. Police officers maintained a perimeter against a growing crowd of journalists and onlookers. Catherine gripped Emma's hand tightly as she navigated them through service corridors, using her employee badge to bypass security checkpoints. "What happened?" Emma asked, her voice sounding distant even to herself. Catherine hesitated. "There was an attack at the memorial. Someone threw a grenade into the crowd." She swallowed hard. "Your dad. He caught it, Emma. He used his body to shield everyone else from the blast." The words didn't make sense at first. Her dad? The quiet, reserved man who made her breakfast every morning, who sat silently through parent-teacher conferences, who worked boring security jobs and hardly spoke about his military past. "That can't be right," Emma whispered. Catherine led them through double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and into the intensive care unit. The nurse at the station recognized Catherine immediately. "He's in Trauma 3, she said quietly. "Dr. Patel is with him now." Outside the trauma room, a doctor in surgical scrubs intercepted them. His dark face was lined with fatigue, his eyes grave behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You're Michael Donovan's family?" he asked. Catherine nodded. "I'm his sister-in-law, Catherine Reynolds. This is his daughter, Emma." The doctor's expression softened slightly when he looked at Emma. "I'm Dr. Patel. Your father is in critical condition. He absorbed most of the explosion with his body." His clinical tone couldn't fully mask the note of amazement. "We're preparing him for surgery now. The next few hours are critical, but we're doing everything we can." Emma felt her knees weaken. Catherine's arm went around her shoulders, steadying her. "Can I see him?" Emma asked. Dr. Patel hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly. He's heavily sedated and intubated." Nothing could have prepared Emma for the sight that greeted her inside the trauma room. The figure on the bed bore almost no resemblance to her father. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped and hissed. Bandages covered much of his body, already seeping with blood in places. What skin remained visible was ghostly pale. Emma approached slowly, afraid to touch anything. One of her father's hands lay exposed at his side, and she gently placed her palm against it. His skin felt cold. "Dad," she whispered, leaning closer. "I'm here. I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean what I said." The only response was the rhythmic wheeze of the ventilator breathing for him. A nurse touched Emma's shoulder gently. "They need to take him up to surgery now." Back in the waiting area, Emma found herself sitting across from a young Hispanic man with his arm in a sling. He stared at the floor, seemingly oblivious to the activity around him, until he glanced up and noticed Emma. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You're Donovan's kid," he said. Not a question. Emma nodded slowly. "You knew my dad?" "Rodriguez," he introduced himself. "I worked security with him. I was there today." His voice had a mechanical quality, as if he were reciting facts without fully processing them. "Your dad saved at least 30 people today. Never seen anything like it." Emma didn't know how to respond. The man before her had witnessed whatever heroic act her father had performed, while she was left trying to reconcile this new reality with the quiet, distant parent she'd known. A television mounted in the corner of the waiting room showed live coverage of the attack. Emma found herself drawn to it, watching as reporters stood in front of the memorial, now cordoned off with police tape. "Authorities have identified the attacker as Malik Hadid, 35, a naturalized citizen with reported ties to extremist groups," the anchor was saying. "At least 12 people were injured in today's attack, with one civilian security guard critically wounded after reportedly shielding others from the explosion." That was it. One line. Not even her father's name. Catherine's phone rang, startling them both. She stepped away to answer it, but her raised voice quickly drew attention. "What?" she shouted. "How is that possible? He was working. He was on duty." Nearby heads turned at her outburst. Catherine lowered her voice but continued to argue with whoever was on the line. When she returned to Emma, her face was even paler than before. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, though it seemed absurd to think anything could be worse than the current situation. Catherine ran a hand through her disheveled hair. "That was someone from the security company your dad worked for. They're claiming his actions constituted a violation of protocol that invalidates his insurance coverage." Emma stared at her aunt in disbelief. "What does that mean?" "It means they're trying to avoid paying his medical expenses. They're saying he should have evacuated civilians, not engaged directly." The disgust in Catherine's voice was palpable. "He saves dozens of lives, and they're finding technicalities to abandon him." Before Emma could process this new betrayal, Dr. Patel appeared in the waiting room doorway. His expression was grave as he motioned for them to follow him. "We need to operate immediately," he explained as they walked quickly down the corridor. "The imaging shows multiple shrapnel fragments have migrated dangerously close to his heart. There's also significant damage to his liver and spleen." Outside the operating room, they were instructed to wait. A nurse handed them a plastic bag containing Michael's personal effects: his wallet, keys, phone, and his blood-stained security company jacket. Emma clutched the jacket, inhaling her father's familiar scent, mixed with the metallic tang of blood. Something crinkled in the pocket. She reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the note she had ignored that morning. "Everything I do for you." The handwriting blurred as tears filled her eyes. All the cruel things she had said the night before came rushing back, magnified 1,000 times by the knowledge that these might be her father's last words to her. The surgery stretched for hours. Catherine maintained a stoic presence beside Emma, though her own eyes were red-rimmed and haunted. They barely spoke, the weight of potential loss too heavy for words. Other families came and went from the surgical waiting area, receiving news of their loved ones injured in the attack. Some cried with relief at positive updates. Others collapsed with grief at worst outcomes. Emma and Catherine remained, suspended in their private purgatory, waiting. Finally, as evening shadows lengthened across the waiting room floor, the surgeon appeared. He removed his surgical mask with trembling hands, exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. "We did everything we could," he began, and Emma felt the world collapse around her. The rain fell softly on the small gathering at Fairview Cemetery, droplets sliding off the polished surface of Michael Donovan's casket. Emma stood motionless beside it, her black dress soaked through despite the umbrella Catherine held over them. She barely registered the chill, her eyes fixed on the simple wooden box that contained what remained of her father. The funeral was sparsely attended. Catherine, Emma, a handful of uncomfortable-looking co-workers from the security company, and a few neighbors who barely knew Michael but felt obligated to show support. No military honor guard, no officials, no recognition of heroism, despite the fact that Michael's actions had saved dozens of lives, including 2 local politicians who couldn't be bothered to send so much as a condolence card. The pastor, who had never met Michael, recited generic platitudes about a life well lived and eternal peace. Emma tuned him out, her mind replaying the surgeon's devastating words from 3 days ago. "We did everything we could, but the damage was too extensive. He never regained consciousness. I'm so sorry." Just like that, her father was gone. The man she had argued with, criticized, and misunderstood was now beyond reach, beyond apology. As the service concluded, Catherine squeezed Emma's shoulder. "We should go home. You're freezing." Home. The word felt hollow now. The modest 3-bedroom house where Emma had grown up, would soon be sold to cover medical bills. Catherine had spent the past days on endless phone calls with insurance companies, hospital billing departments, and mortgage lenders, all while trying to arrange the funeral and comfort Emma. Back at the house, Emma changed into dry clothes. While Catherine made tea, neither of them would drink. The kitchen table had disappeared under stacks of paperwork, denial letters from the security company's insurance, hospital bills with astronomical figures, and a growing pile of collection notices for Michael's modest debts that had somehow already found them. "We'll figure this out," Catherine said, though her red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands belied her confident words. "I've applied for emergency bereavement leave at the hospital. I can stay with you until—" She didn't finish the sentence. Until what? Until they were forced to sell the house? Until Emma graduated and could support herself? The unspoken questions hung in the air between them. Emma nodded mechanically, her gaze drifting to her father's recliner in the living room. His reading glasses still sat on the side table beside it, next to a half-finished crossword puzzle and a mug with dried coffee residue at the bottom. It was as if he might walk through the door at any moment, apologizing for being late. The doorbell rang, startling them both. "That's probably Mrs. Henley from next door," Catherine sighed. She mentioned bringing a casserole. But it wasn't Mrs. Henley. It was Rodriguez, Michael's colleague, his arm still in a sling, holding a small box. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said awkwardly. "I wanted to come to the funeral, but I had to give my statement to federal investigators again." He paused, looking past Catherine to Emma. "I brought some of your dad's things from his locker at work." Catherine invited him in, and Rodriguez set the box on the coffee table. It contained pathetically little: a spare uniform shirt, a travel coffee mug, a paperback thriller with a bookmark halfway through, and a small framed photo of Emma at about 12 years old. "Thank you for coming," Emma said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Did you—" She hesitated. "Did you see what happened?" Rodriguez nodded gravely. "I was there. Your dad spotted the threat before anyone else. He tried to warn us, but there wasn't time to evacuate." He swallowed hard. When the grenade was thrown, he didn't hesitate, he just acted. "To save people who didn't even know his name," Emma said bitterly. Rodriguez looked down at his injured arm. "They know now," he said quietly. "At least, some of us do." After Rodriguez left, Emma returned to school, despite Catherine's protests that she could take more time. But the empty house, with its echoing silence and constant reminders of her father, was unbearable. At least school offered distraction. She quickly discovered that distraction came with its own price. Word had spread about her father's death, transforming Emma into an unwilling celebrity of tragedy. Some students stared openly, whispering behind their hands when she passed. Others approached with exaggerated sympathy, eager to associate themselves with her drama. "I can't even imagine what you're going through," said Madison Campbell, a girl who had barely spoken to Emma in 3 years of shared classes. "My aunt died last year, so I totally understand grief." Emma nodded politely but said nothing, pushing past to her locker. In history class, Lisa Chen slid into the seat beside her. "I saw your dad on the news," she whispered as the teacher took attendance. "They're calling him a hero." "They mentioned him?" Emma asked, surprise momentarily breaking through her emotional fog. "Well, not by name," Lisa admitted. "But they showed footage of the ambulance and said a security guard saved a bunch of people. Anonymous in life, anonymous in death. Just a security guard. Not Michael Donovan, former staff sergeant, father, husband, human being. The worst moment came during 6th period. The regular English teacher was out sick, and a substitute had organized an impromptu class debate on heroism versus duty. When does obligation end? For example, the substitute said enthusiastically, "Just last week, We saw that security guard at the Veterans Memorial throw himself on a grenade. Was that heroism, or simply performing the job he was paid to do? Emma froze as several students turned to look at her. Her chest constricted painfully as the discussion continued around her, students arguing the philosophical merits of her father's sacrifice as if it were an abstract concept rather than the devastating reality that had destroyed her life. I think if you sign up for a dangerous job, you basically accept that you might die doing it, argued Tyler Hansen. It's sad, but it's what they're paid for. But he was just a rent-a-cop, countered another student. Not like he was Secret Service or something. The substitute looked confused by the sudden tension in the room. Emma felt tears welling up, her breathing becoming shallow and quick. Without warning, she bolted from her seat and ran from the classroom, ignoring the teacher's startled call. She found herself in the girls' bathroom, locked in a stall, sobbing until her ribs ached. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Emma slipped out and walked home, ignoring calls and texts from concerned friends. At home, she found Catherine in the garage, surrounded by dusty cardboard boxes pulled from the attic. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, dropping her backpack by the door. Catherine looked up, brushing cobwebs from her hair. "Going through your dad's military things. I thought we might find something to help with the veterans' benefits application." The VA denied his death benefits because apparently he missed some recertification appointment years ago. It's ridiculous bureaucracy. Emma knelt beside the nearest box, pulling back the flaps. Inside were her father's military medals, carefully mounted and framed, yet stored away where no one could see them. Another box contained certificates of training, commendations, and faded photographs of younger Michael with fellow soldiers in desert camouflage. "He saved all those people," Emma whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks again as she examined a Bronze Star citation. "He did everything right his whole life, and nobody cares. It's like he was disposable." Catherine set down the file she'd been examining and moved to embrace her niece. "The system has always been this way with people like your father," she said bitterly. "They're heroes when it's convenient, and just numbers when they're no longer useful." They spent hours going through Michael's military records, looking for anything that might help their case with the VA. Catherine explained that without veterans' benefits, they would receive nothing. No funeral assistance, no survivor benefits, not even a flag ceremony at the burial. "Why didn't he tell me about any of this?" Emma asked, examining a photograph of her father receiving a medal, his face younger but already carrying the serious expression she'd always known. "All these commendations, these missions. I knew he was in the Army, but he never talked about it." "Your father wasn't one to glorify what he did," Catherine said softly. "After Sarah died, he seemed to fold into himself even more. I think the only thing that kept him going was you." The final blow came as Catherine dug through a folder of official correspondence. Her face darkened as she read a letter dated 2 years earlier. "Oh, Michael," she sighed. "Why didn't you tell me?" "What is it?" Emma asked, moving to read over her shoulder. "Your father lost his veteran status 3 years ago because he missed a mandatory medical reevaluation," Catherine explained. "It was scheduled during Sarah's final weeks. He chose to stay with her instead of going to the appointment." Emma felt a fresh wave of grief and anger. So because he stayed with his dying wife, they just erased his service? 22 years just gone? "The system doesn't care about reasons," Catherine said, her voice tight with restrained fury. "Only procedures." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The unfairness of it all consumed her, burning in her chest like physical pain. Around midnight, she climbed out her bedroom window onto the sloping roof, the place where she and her father used to watch stars when she was younger. The night sky was clear, stars sharp against the darkness. Emma tilted her head back and screamed her rage into the empty air, the sound torn from deep within her chest. The neighbor's lights flicked on, but she didn't care. She pulled her father's crumpled security badge from her pocket and hurled it as far as she could into the darkness. Instantly regretting it, she scrambled down from the roof and ran barefoot across the damp lawn, desperately searching for the badge in the grass. When she finally found it, soaked with dew and mud, she clutched it to her chest and wept. For her father, for herself, for the apologies that would never be spoken, and the understanding that had come too late. Back inside, she found Catherine on the phone in the kitchen, her expression stunned. "Yes, this is the address," her aunt confirmed mechanically before hanging up. She turned to Emma with wide eyes. "That was the Pentagon," she said in disbelief. "They're sending someone tomorrow." As Emma tried to process this information, the night was suddenly illuminated by headlights as 3 official cars and a military van pulled up outside their house much earlier than the promised dawn. Emma stood frozen in the doorway as 3 black SUVs and a military van parked in front of their modest home. Catherine moved beside her, instinctively placing a protective arm around her niece's shoulders. "They said tomorrow," Catherine whispered, hastily wiping tear tracks from her face. "Maybe it's not them," Emma replied, though the official government plates left little doubt. Men in dark suits emerged from the first vehicle, scanning the surroundings with practiced efficiency. From the second SUV stepped a tall, gray-haired man in full military dress uniform, his chest adorned with rows of colorful ribbons and medals. The brass eagles on his shoulders caught the porch light as he approached the house. "That's a full colonel," Catherine murmured in surprise. The officer walked with ramrod-straight posture to their front door and rang the bell. Emma and Catherine exchanged a nervous glance before Catherine opened the door. "Good evening," the officer said, his voice deep and formal. "I'm Colonel James Wilson, United States Army. I apologize for the late hour and for arriving ahead of schedule, but matters developed that required immediate attention." His eyes moved to Emma. "You must be Miss Donovan." Emma nodded, suddenly very aware of her tear-stained face and rumpled clothes. "May we come in?" Colonel Wilson asked. "What I have to discuss is of significant importance." Catherine ushered the visitors into their living room. Colonel Wilson was accompanied by 2 aides who remained standing while he took the offered seat. Emma noticed they carried official-looking briefcases. "I'll make coffee," Catherine said, her hospital training kicking in. "Always offer hospitality in a crisis." "That would be appreciated, ma'am," Wilson replied. While Catherine busied herself in the kitchen, Emma sat awkwardly across from the colonel, acutely conscious of the house's disarray. Papers scattered across the coffee table, unwashed dishes in the sink, the general evidence of their lives falling apart. "I understand this is an extremely difficult time," Wilson began, his tone softening slightly. "First, allow me to express my personal condolences for your loss. Your father was an exceptional soldier." "You knew him?" Emma asked, surprise momentarily overriding her emotional exhaustion. Wilson shook his head. "Not personally, no. But I've thoroughly reviewed his service record over the past 72 hours, and I've watched the security footage from the Veterans Memorial incident multiple times." Catherine returned with their best mugs on a tray, serving coffee with shaky hands. "Why the sudden interest in Michael?" she asked directly. "No one from the military even came to his funeral." Wilson accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "That was an unfortunate oversight that I personally regret. The truth is, we've been conducting an intensive investigation into the attack, and your brother-in-law's actions require special attention." He set his coffee down and motioned to one of his aides, who opened a briefcase and handed him a folder stamped with security classifications. "Miss Donovan," Wilson addressed Emma formally, "I'm here representing the Department of Defense and the President of the United States." The weight of his words hung in the air. Emma felt her heart rate accelerate. Our forensic analysis of the incident revealed something that wasn't initially apparent, Wilson continued. The grenade used in the attack wasn't a standard M67 fragmentation grenade, but a modified version with an enhanced explosive. Charge. He removed a technical diagram from the folder. This particular modification would have created a kill radius nearly twice that of a standard grenade, with an injury radius extending to approximately 50 feet in all directions. Emma tried to process this information. So more people would have been hurt? Miss Donovan, given the crowd density at the memorial that day, we estimate casualties would have numbered in the dozens, with at least 25 probable fatalities, many of them children. Catherine gasped softly. Wilson's piercing blue eyes locked with Emma's. Your father didn't just throw himself on a grenade. Our analysis of the security footage shows that he specifically positioned the explosive against his abdomen in a way that directed the blast into his own body, rather than outward. He paused, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. In all my years of service, I've rarely witnessed this level of presence of mind and self-sacrifice. Staff Sergeant Donovan made a split-second calculation that saved dozens of lives at the absolute certainty of his own death. Emma felt tears welling again. That's who he was, she whispered. Wilson nodded gravely. Indeed, which brings me to why I'm here. He motioned to his aide again, who handed him an official-looking document in a leather portfolio. After reviewing all available evidence and witness testimonies, including high-resolution security footage, the President has authorized the posthumous award of the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan. Emma stared at him in disbelief. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration that can be bestowed upon a member of the United States Armed Forces, Wilson explained. It is extremely rare for it to be awarded to someone who was technically a civilian at the time of their actions. However, the President agrees with our assessment that your father never truly ceased to be a soldier. Catherine had moved to sit beside Emma, gripping her hand tightly. There will be a formal ceremony at the White House next week, Wilson continued. Transportation and accommodations will be arranged for both of you. I don't understand, Emma said, her voice small. A few days ago, we couldn't even get basic veterans benefits. The VA said he wasn't eligible because he missed some appointment. Now, the Medal of Honor? Wilson's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. That situation has been rectified. Your father's veteran status has been fully reinstated, with an official apology for the clerical error. All benefits will be backdated appropriately. Emma sensed there was more to the story than a simple clerical error, but before she could press further, Wilson added, additionally, all medical expenses have been classified as service-related and will be covered in full. Catherine made a choked sound that was half sob, half laugh. The financial burden that had been crushing them suddenly lifted. Wilson stood, signaling the end of the formal part of their discussion. My aides will provide you with all the necessary information about the ceremony and benefits. He hesitated, then added more softly, for what it's worth, Miss Donovan, your father's actions have reverberated throughout the highest levels of our government. He will not be forgotten. As the aides laid out documents for Catherine to review, Wilson motioned for Emma to join him by the window. There's something else you should know, he said quietly, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. Your father was under our radar for some time. He wasn't a simple security guard. Emma frowned. What do you mean? I'm not at liberty to share the details, but let's just say your father maintained certain connections with the intelligence community after his official discharge. Emma felt as though the floor had tilted beneath her. My dad was a spy? Wilson almost smiled. Nothing so dramatic. Let's say he was an observer who occasionally shared valuable information. He paused. Did he ever mention an operation called Silent Tempest? Emma shook her head, struggling to reconcile this new information with the quiet, reserved father she'd known. "I've said more than I should," Wilson concluded. "But I thought you deserved to know that your father's service to this country never truly ended." After the military contingent departed, promising to return in the morning with more details about the upcoming ceremony, Emma and Catherine sat in stunned silence at the kitchen table. "Did you know?" Emma finally asked. "About Dad working with intelligence people?" Catherine shook her head slowly. Michael never shared much about certain operations, even with Sarah. There were classified aspects of his service that he took very seriously. Emma rose suddenly. "I need to check something." She went to her father's bedroom, which neither of them had been able to fully enter since his death. The familiar scent of his aftershave still lingered. Emma moved to his closet and ran her hands along the back wall, remembering something from childhood, a secret compartment her father had shown her once, telling her it was where he kept important things. Her fingers found the barely perceptible seam, but the panel wouldn't budge. A lock? She hadn't remembered a lock. Emma searched the room, looking for anything that might serve as a key. In his nightstand drawer, beneath a dog-eared paperback, she found a strange-looking key she'd never seen before. The key fit perfectly into an almost invisible keyhole. The panel slid open, revealing a small cache of documents, some partially burned, photographs of military operations she didn't recognize, and a medal without identification or markings. Emma carried everything to the kitchen table, where Catherine was already examining the documents Colonel Wilson had left. "Look at this," Emma said, spreading out her discoveries. Catherine picked up one of the singed documents, her eyes widening. "These are from classified operations. Michael should never have had these at home." Among the papers, Emma found several unopened letters addressed to her mother, dated during her father's last deployment. She hesitated, then gently opened one. "Sarah," it began, "there are things I've seen here that I can never unsee. Things I've done that I'll never be able to explain to you or Emma." The letter detailed atrocities her father had witnessed, the emotional toll of combat, fears he couldn't share with anyone else. Emma read with tears streaming down her face, finally glimpsing the man behind the stoic mask he'd worn for so long. Catherine suddenly gasped, holding up a thin file folder. "Emma, this is—" She stopped, flipping through pages with increasing agitation. "This is a dossier on Malik Hadid, the man who attacked the memorial." "What?" Emma moved to look over her aunt's shoulder. The file contained surveillance photos, notes in her father's handwriting, newspaper clippings, all focused on the terrorist who had thrown the grenade. "Your father was investigating him before the attack," Catherine whispered. "He knew something was going to happen. So he wasn't just in the right place at the right time," Emma said slowly, the realization dawning. "He positioned himself there deliberately, knowing there was a threat." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Colonel Wilson stood alone on the porch, his aides and vehicles gone. "I thought you might find some things," he said when Catherine let him in. "I came back to explain." Wilson declined to sit, remaining standing in the living room. "Your father contacted us 3 weeks ago with concerns about a potential threat at the Veterans Memorial Ceremony. He'd been tracking Hadid, a former translator from his unit in Afghanistan, who had become radicalized." "You knew?" Emma demanded, anger flaring. "You knew there was a threat and did nothing?" Wilson's face tightened. "We investigated, but without concrete evidence. We couldn't justify canceling a high-profile event. We increased security, but—" He looked away. "Your father was right. We were wrong. He paid the price for our mistake." Emma stared at the colonel, a new understanding forming. "So that's why the Medal of Honor, the benefits, all of it. You feel guilty." "The medal is because your father earned it," Wilson replied firmly. "The rest, Yes, there's an element of making amends. Michael Donovan warned us we failed to act adequately, and he sacrificed himself to correct our failure. As Wilson turned to leave, Emma spotted something among the papers they'd spread across the table, a photograph she hadn't noticed before. She picked it up, her blood turning cold as she recognized the two men in the image. Her father, much younger, arms slung around the shoulders of a man she instantly recognized as Malik Hadid, the same terrorist who had thrown the grenade at the memorial. Emma stared at the photograph in her trembling hands, unable to reconcile the image with everything she'd just learned. Her father, younger, actually smiling, had his arm draped casually around the shoulders of the very man who had killed him. Both wore desert camouflage uniforms, standing against a backdrop of mountains that must have been Afghanistan. "Colonel Wilson," Emma called, rushing to the door where the officer was about to leave. "What is this? Who is this man to my father?" Wilson took the photo, his expression darkening. "Where did you find this?" "In my father's things." "That's Malik Hadid, isn't it? The terrorist from the memorial?" Wilson handed the photo back with evident reluctance. "Hadid was an interpreter attached to your father's unit during his first deployment to Afghanistan in 2007. They worked closely together for nearly a year." "They were friends," Emma said. Not a question, but a realization as she studied the relaxed posture, the genuine smiles. "They were," Wilson admitted. "Until Operation Silent Tempest went wrong. Hadid was reported killed in action after that. Clearly the reports were incorrect." Before Emma could ask more questions, Wilson's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression turning grim. "I've said too much already. I'll return tomorrow with the official paperwork." With that, he strode quickly to his waiting car. Emma returned to the kitchen, showing Catherine the photograph. "Dad knew him. They served together." Catherine studied the image. "This must be from his first tour in Afghanistan, before he met your mother." She turned the photo over, noting a date scribbled on the back, May 2007. Emma sank into a chair, her mind racing. "I need to know more about this, about what happened between them." "Emma," Catherine cautioned, "this is clearly classified military business. Wilson all but admitted they're covering something up." But Emma wasn't listening. She was already reaching for her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found Rodriguez's number. "I need to talk to you," she said when he answered. "It's about my dad and Malik Hadid." There was a long pause on the line. "How do you know that name?" Rodriguez finally asked. "I'll explain when I see you. Where are you now?" "County General, physical therapy for my arm. I'll be done in an hour." "I'll meet you there." Catherine protested, but Emma was already grabbing her jacket. "I need answers, Aunt Catherine. Dad deserves that much." At the hospital, Emma found Rodriguez in the outpatient rehabilitation center, flexing his injured arm under a therapist's supervision. When he saw Emma, he quickly finished his session and met her in the waiting area. "You shouldn't be digging into this," he said without preamble, leading her to a quiet corner. Emma pulled out the photograph. They knew each other, my dad and the terrorist. Rodriguez stared at the image, then glanced around nervously. "Not here," he muttered. "Too many ears." They relocated to the hospital cafeteria, which was nearly empty at this late hour. Rodriguez hunched over his coffee, speaking quietly. "That's Malik Hadid. Served with your dad as an interpreter during his first Afghanistan tour. Everyone called him Mal." Rodriguez paused. "He was officially declared killed in action in 2008 after an operation that went sideways." "What operation?" Emma pressed. "I don't know details. Your dad never talked about it, but it affected him deeply. I only know because he had a nightmare during an overnight shift once. Called out Hadid's name." Emma leaned forward. "But Hadid wasn't dead. He was here in America." "Apparently so." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I shouldn't be talking about this." There are federal agents all over this case now. Please, Emma implored. I need to understand why this man targeted my father. Rodriguez sighed. I don't know if he was targeting your dad specifically, but I can tell you your father recognized him instantly that day. I saw it in his face. Not just alert, but like he'd seen a ghost. Emma left the hospital with more questions than answers. Over the next few days, she devoted herself to researching everything she could find about her father's military history and Operation Silent Tempest. The public library yielded little information. Military databases available to civilians contained only the most basic facts about deployments. News archives from 2008 mentioned increased operations in eastern Afghanistan, but nothing specific about Silent Tempest. Emma's breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the Veterans Support Center downtown, where retired service members gathered for community and assistance. She'd gone on a hunch, bringing the photograph of her father and Hadid. The center was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon, just a few elderly veterans playing cards and a middle-aged man with a prosthetic leg working the reception desk. I'm looking for anyone who might have served in Afghanistan around 2007-2008, Emma explained, showing him her father's photo. Particularly anyone who might remember Operation Silent Tempest. The man's expression changed subtly. Why do you want to know about that? My father was Michael Donovan. He died in the memorial attack last week. Recognition dawned in the man's eyes. The security guard who jumped on the grenade. That was your dad? Emma nodded. The receptionist studied her for a long moment, then lowered his voice. Come back at closing, 7 o'clock. Ask for Martinez. Emma returned at the appointed time. The center was emptying out, but the receptionist nodded toward a back office. Inside, an older man with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face waited. Martinez? Emma asked. He nodded. Thomas Martinez. I served with your father in the 10th Mountain Division. He gestured to a chair. I recognized you from the news. I would have attended the funeral, but I only connected the dots after seeing the Medal of Honor announcement. You knew my dad? Different platoon, same company. We rotated through some of the same areas. Martinez's eyes narrowed. Why are you asking about Silent Tempest? Emma placed the photograph of her father with Hadid on the desk. Martinez stared at it for a long moment, then looked up sharply. Where did you get this? My father's personal effects. The man with him is Malik Hadid, the terrorist who attacked the memorial. Martinez cursed under his breath, then stood. We shouldn't talk here. Too many ears. In the parking lot, Martinez checked carefully around them before speaking. That operation was covered up completely. There were civilians involved, a village that wasn't supposed to be there on our target maps. Something went very wrong. What happened? Martinez glanced around nervously again. I don't know details. I wasn't directly involved. But there were rumors, casualties that weren't reported, evidence that disappeared. He nodded toward the photo. Hadid was listed as KIA, but clearly that wasn't true. As Emma walked to her car, she sensed she was being watched. A black sedan was parked across the street, its engine running. When she looked directly at it, it pulled away smoothly, but not before she glimpsed a man in a suit behind the wheel. The next morning, Catherine received a call from the hospital. Federal agents were here asking about Michael's medical records, she reported to Emma, her voice tense. They had a warrant, but it's highly unusual. Emma wasn't surprised. After their visit to the Veterans Center, she had the distinct feeling they had stirred up something significant. Her suspicions were confirmed when Colonel Wilson appeared at their door that afternoon, unannounced and alone. You've been asking questions about Operation Silent Tempest, he said without preamble once they were seated in the living room. I need to strongly caution you against pursuing this further. Why? Emma challenged. What are you trying to hide? This isn't about hiding anything, Wilson replied carefully. It's about not reopening wounds that some would prefer remain closed. My father is dead because of whatever happened in that operation, Emma said, her voice rising. I deserve to know why. Wilson studied her for a long moment. Your father was a good soldier who found himself in an impossible situation. Decisions were made above his pay grade that had devastating consequences. That's all I can say. Not good enough, Emma insisted. Why was my father watching Hadid? Why didn't anyone listen when he warned about a threat? Wilson stood to leave. Be careful, Miss Donovan. You're stirring up matters with serious national security implications. After Wilson left, Emma made a decision. With Catherine's help, she called in a favor from a courthouse clerk who owed Catherine for nursing his mother. They arranged a visit to see Hadid, who was being held in federal custody pending trial. The detention facility was a maze of security checkpoints. Emma was searched thoroughly before being led to a sparse visitation room. When Hadid was brought in, handcuffed and shackled, she was struck by how different he looked from the smiling young man in the photograph with her father. Hadid stared at her without expression as he sat across the table. Do you know who I am? Emma asked. Michael Donovan's daughter, Hadid replied, his voice carrying a faint accent. They told me you were coming. Why did you do it? Emma demanded. He was your friend. Hadid's face remained impassive. You know nothing about what happened between your father and me. Then tell me. For several minutes, Hadid remained silent, simply studying her face. Finally, he spoke. Your father was not trying to stop me that day. He was trying to protect me. Emma recoiled in shock. What are you talking about? You threw a grenade into a crowd. Not into the crowd, Hadid corrected. At a specific target. Your father knew who. He had been helping me track them for months. Before Emma could process this bombshell, a guard entered abruptly. Visit's over. There's been a situation. As Emma was escorted out, a flurry of activity erupted in the detention area. Alarms sounded and guards ran toward the cell block. She learned what happened from the evening news. Malik Hadid had been found dead in his cell from an apparent suicide. The circumstances were suspicious. He had been on suicide watch, with nothing in his cell that could have been used to harm himself. But the official story was already set. On arriving home, Emma found her blood running cold. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, the house had been thoroughly ransacked. Catherine lay unconscious on the living room floor, a gash on her forehead. As Emma called for an ambulance, she realized with horror that all of her father's documents, the photographs, everything they had discovered, it was all gone. Everything except the small USB drive she'd hidden inside the stuffed bear her father had given her when she was 8 years old. The rhythmic beeping of hospital machines was the only sound in Catherine's room, as Emma sat by her bedside, exhausted but unable to sleep. The doctors had diagnosed a moderate concussion, saying Catherine was lucky the intruders hadn't used more force. They expected her to regain consciousness soon, but every hour that passed without Catherine waking intensified Emma's anxiety. A police officer had taken a perfunctory statement, treating the incident as a routine home invasion despite Emma's insistence that specific documents had been targeted. When she mentioned her father's military service and the recent Pentagon visit, the officer had smiled patronizingly and suggested that grief was making her paranoid. Emma checked her watch. 2:13 a.m. She couldn't stay at the hospital indefinitely, and she needed to examine the USB drive before whoever ransacked their house realized they'd missed it. Making sure Catherine was comfortable, Emma scribbled a note explaining where she'd gone and left it on the bedside table. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty. Emma scanned for surveillance cameras or unusual vehicles before walking to the bus stop. She couldn't risk returning home, not with the intruders potentially watching the house. 20 minutes later, she checked into the Sunset Motel under the name Sarah Reynolds, paying cash from the emergency stash Catherine kept in the kitchen. The motel was the kind of place that didn't ask questions. Faded carpets, flickering neon signs, and a disinterested night clerk who barely looked up from his magazine. Room 119 smelled of industrial cleaner, barely masking decades of cigarette smoke. Emma locked and chained the door, then pushed a chair under the handle for good measure. She drew the heavy curtains and surveyed her temporary sanctuary. A sagging double bed, a scratched laminate desk, and a TV that looked at least 20 years old. From her backpack, Emma extracted the worn teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, her childhood confidant. Her father had given it to her on her 8th birthday, and she'd kept it even as a teenager, though she'd never admit that to her friends. Now she carefully opened the hidden zipper along its back seam and extracted the small black USB drive she'd hidden there hours earlier. Emma had grabbed the cheapest laptop she could find at a 24-hour pawn shop on her way to the motel, a battered Toshiba that had seen better days, but it functioned. The owner had accepted cash and asked no questions, exactly what she needed. The laptop whirred to life reluctantly. Emma inserted the USB drive, her pulse quickening as a folder appeared on screen. Her hopes immediately deflated when she saw the contents, a series of files with random alphanumeric names, all seemingly encrypted. "Damn it, Dad," she muttered, clicking on file after file only to be met with unintelligible code or password prompts. Of course, her father would have protected sensitive information, but now she had no way to access it. Emma leaned back in the uncomfortable chair, massaging her temples. What password would her father have used? She tried his military ID number, his birthday, her mother's birthday, all rejected. She tried Silent Tempest and Hadid. Nothing. Then a thought struck her. Emma typed in her own birth date, Sulfur 11203. The files unlocked instantly. A cascade of documents filled the screen: military reports, GPS coordinates, communication transcripts, photos of a destroyed village. Emma leaned forward, her fatigue forgotten as she opened file after file, the pieces of her father's secret life coming together. One document stood out: an official military report denying the existence of Operation Silent Tempest in eastern Afghanistan. It was dated 2008, with multiple signatures from high-ranking officials. Beside it was another document, her father's handwritten account of the same operation, describing a night raid gone horribly wrong. According to Michael's account, intelligence had identified a compound, supposedly housing Taliban leaders. His unit, with Hadid as interpreter, had been sent to capture or kill the targets, but the intelligence was flawed, catastrophically so. The compound wasn't a Taliban stronghold, but a village gathering for a wedding celebration. In the confusion of the night raid, with communications breaking down and conflicting orders, shots were fired. By the time the mistake was realized, 34 civilians lay dead, including 13 children. Emma felt physically ill reading the details. Her father described arguing with a superior officer about reporting the incident truthfully, being overruled, and eventually receiving direct orders to support the official story, that they had successfully eliminated Taliban fighters with no civilian casualties. Hadid, who had family in a neighboring village, had been particularly devastated. He'd threatened to expose the truth and disappeared the next day. The official report listed him as killed in action during the operation. As Emma continued through the files, she discovered dozens of emails her father had sent to reporters and government oversight committees in the weeks before the memorial attack, all without response. He had meticulously documented his attempts to bring attention to the cover-up, only to be ignored at every turn. Then Emma found something that made her blood run cold: a series of photographs showing Hadid and her father meeting secretly at various locations over the past year. Notes in her father's handwriting detailed their conversations, Hadid's growing radicalization, and his fixation on the officers who had orchestrated the cover-up. "He's planning something," Michael had written 2 weeks before the attack. I tried to talk him down, but he's beyond reason now. Says the truth needs a spotlight only blood can create. I fear what he might do. With trembling hands, Emma opened a video file dated just 3 days before the memorial ceremony. Her father's face filled the screen, looking exhausted and tense, sitting at his desk at home. "Emma," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "if you're seeing this, something went wrong. What I'm going to do isn't just for you, but for all those we lost that night." He paused, rubbing his face. "I've tried everything to get someone to listen. Proper channels, oversight committees, journalists. No one cares about a massacre from years ago, especially when admitting it happened would embarrass powerful people." Michael leaned closer to the camera. "Hadid contacted me a month ago. He's back in the country. He blames everyone involved for the cover-up, but especially General Westfield, who'll be speaking at the memorial next week. I've been meeting with Hadid, trying to convince him there are better ways to get justice." He looked away briefly. "I don't think I succeeded. He's planning something at the memorial, something violent. I've reported my concerns through official channels, but they're dismissing it as paranoia from a washed-up vet." Emma's father looked directly into the camera again, his eyes intense. "I've taken a security position at the event. If Hadid follows through with his plan, I'll be there to stop him." He paused. "Whatever happens, know that I love you. I wish I'd been a better father, been more present. Everything I've done, everything I'm about to do, is to build a world where the powerful can't just bury their mistakes, along with innocent lives." The video ended, leaving Emma staring at a black screen, tears streaming down her face. She continued through the files with growing horror, discovering her father had outlined a detailed plan. He had anticipated Hadid's attack and positioned himself strategically to intervene. But nowhere in his notes was there any indication he'd expected the modified grenade. That horrible detail had apparently been Hadid's secret escalation. A chilling realization settled over Emma. Her father hadn't accidentally been in the right place at the right time. He deliberately placed himself in harm's way, planning to create a public confrontation that would finally force attention on the covered-up massacre. He had gambled that his military training would allow him to disarm Hadid without casualties. But Hadid had changed the plan without telling him. The modified grenade had ensured there would be mass casualties unless someone made the ultimate sacrifice. Emma found one final document, an email her father had scheduled to send to multiple news organizations the morning after the memorial. It contained all the evidence of the massacre, the cover-up, and the names of those responsible. It was his fail-safe, intended to be sent if his confrontation with Hadid didn't generate the attention he sought. But Michael had died instantly, and the email had never been sent. Emma sat back, overwhelmed by the truth. Her father hadn't merely died a hero, he had deliberately orchestrated a situation where he could either capture Hadid and force attention to the massacre, or die trying. He had been willing to risk everything for justice, never anticipating that Hadid's modified weapon would leave him no option but sacrifice. Dawn was breaking outside the grimy motel window when Emma finally organized all the information into a coherent narrative. She created copies of the most crucial files, preparing to share them with someone who could help expose the truth. The question was who? The military was actively covering this up. The police had dismissed her concerns. Journalists had ignored her father's evidence. Catherine was hospitalized. Rodriguez might help, but he was likely being watched. As Emma contemplated her next move, an idea formed. The Medal of Honor ceremony was scheduled for 3 days from now. The president himself would be there, along with media from around the country. If she could somehow use that platform. A loud banging on the door startled Emma from her thoughts. She quickly closed the laptop and moved toward the bathroom, looking for a possible escape route. "FBI, we know you're in there," a stern voice announced. "We need you to open the door now." Emma froze as the pounding on the motel door intensified. Her heart hammered in her chest as she quickly disconnected the USB drive and slipped it into her sock. The bathroom window was small, but might be her only escape route. "Miss Donovan, we know you're in there. Open the door now." The voice was authoritative, brooking no argument. Emma was calculating her odds of squeezing through the tiny window when she heard another voice, lower, familiar, from outside. "Emma, it's Rodriguez. You're safe, I promise. We need to talk." She hesitated, torn between fleeing and trusting her father's colleague. Before she could decide, there was a metallic scraping at the window behind her. Emma whirled around to see the unmistakable silhouette of a woman's face pressed against the glass. "Back up," the woman hissed. "I'm coming in." The window jimmied open, and a slender Asian woman in her 30s slipped into the bathroom with surprising agility. She was dressed in dark clothing, a camera bag slung across her body. "Who are—" Emma began. "Vanessa Chen, investigative journalist." The woman glanced toward the door where the pounding continued. "Those aren't real FBI agents. We need to go, now." "Rodriguez," Emma started, "is out front creating a distraction. Move." Something in the woman's urgent tone convinced Emma. She grabbed the laptop and her backpack, following Vanessa through the bathroom window into the alley behind the motel. A nondescript sedan waited there, engine running. "Get in the back, stay down," Vanessa instructed, sliding into the driver's seat. As they pulled away, Emma peered through the rear window to see men in dark suits running toward the parking lot. She caught a glimpse of Rodriguez near the motel office, gesturing wildly as if arguing with the night clerk. "How did you find me?" Emma asked once they'd driven several blocks without signs of pursuit. "Rodriguez contacted me last night. I've been looking into your father's death since it happened." Vanessa navigated through early morning traffic with practiced ease. "Michael Donovan reached out to me 3 days before he died. I was one of several journalists he contacted about Operation Silent Tempest." Emma sat up straighter. "You knew?" Vanessa adjusted her rear-view mirror. "I received his documentation but was still verifying before committing resources. War crime allegations require rock-solid confirmation." She glanced briefly at Emma. "By the time I was convinced, he was already dead." They drove in silence for several minutes until Vanessa pulled into an underground parking garage. "We're meeting Rodriguez at my place. It should be safe for now." 30 minutes later, Emma sat at a kitchen table in Vanessa's sparsely furnished apartment. Rodriguez arrived shortly after, his arm still in a sling, but looking considerably more alert than when Emma had last seen him. "How's your aunt?" he asked immediately. "Concussion. She'll recover." Emma studied him suspiciously. "How are you involved in all this?" Rodriguez sank into a chair. "Your dad had a contingency plan. He gave me coordinates to check if anything happened to him." He rubbed his face wearily. "I found a locker key taped under a bench at the memorial. Inside was a letter explaining that you might need protection and to contact Vanessa if things went sideways." "He trusted you," Emma said, surprised. "More than I deserved." Rodriguez looked genuinely remorseful. "I always thought your dad was just an uptight ex-military guy taking a security job too seriously. I had no idea what he was really involved in." Vanessa placed 3 mugs of coffee on the table. "Let's compare notes. I've been investigating the Silent Tempest operation for weeks, based on your father's information. What did you find on that drive?" Emma hesitated, then reached for her sock and extracted the USB. "Everything. The operation, the civilian casualties, the cover-up, and something else." She met their eyes. "My father knew Hadid was planning an attack. He positioned himself there deliberately." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I suspected something was off that day. He was too calm, like he was expecting trouble." Emma connected the drive to Vanessa's laptop. For the next hour, they reviewed Michael's files together, with Vanessa occasionally adding context from her own investigation. "This is Pulitzer material," Vanessa muttered, examining the evidence of high-level military officials falsifying reports. "Your father compiled an airtight case." "But will anyone listen?" Emma asked bitterly. "He tried for months." Vanessa's eyes gleamed. "They'll listen when it's front-page news with supporting documents." On the living room television, a news broadcast caught their attention. Coverage of preparations for the Medal of Honor ceremony, scheduled for tomorrow. The White House confirmed that President Harrington will personally present the Medal of Honor to Emma Donovan, daughter of security guard Michael Donovan, who sacrificed his life to save dozens during last week's terrorist attack, the reporter intoned over footage of the White House. Rodriguez straightened suddenly. "That's it. The ceremony is our platform." Emma turned to him, confused. "Think about it," he continued, animated now. "National television coverage, the president, military brass, press, from every major outlet. It's exactly what your father wanted." "Attention." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Using the ceremony to expose the truth. It's risky, but it might work." "But how?" Emma asked. "They'll never let me speak freely." "You'll be giving an acceptance speech," Vanessa pointed out. "Families of recipients always do. They can't exactly cut your microphone with the whole country watching." Rodriguez leaned forward. "We need to distribute the evidence simultaneously, so they can't dismiss it as a grieving daughter's confusion." Vanessa was already typing on her laptop. "I can prepare information packets for every major news outlet. We'll have them delivered during the ceremony." "Wait," Emma interrupted, the full implications hitting her. "If I do this, I'll be turning my father from a hero into—" "What?" "A conspirator? Someone who knew about a terrorist attack and didn't prevent it?" A heavy silence fell over the room. "That's not who he was," Rodriguez said finally. "Your father tried every legitimate channel to expose the truth. When those failed, he put himself in position to stop Hadid with minimal casualties. He never expected a modified grenade." "They'll twist it," Emma whispered. "They'll make him look like a traitor instead of a hero." "Maybe," Vanessa acknowledged. "But isn't the truth what he died for?" Emma stared at the TV screen, now showing a photo of her father in his security uniform. "My dad didn't die for a medal. He died for the truth." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Vanessa drafted a press release with supporting documentation, careful to frame Michael's actions as those of a whistleblower who attempted to prevent violence while exposing injustice. Rodriguez contacted other security personnel who had worked with Michael, discreetly gathering support for tomorrow. As evening approached, Emma practiced what she would say at the ceremony, trying to find words that would honor her father's sacrifice while revealing the truth he had died to expose. "We'll need to be careful getting you to the ceremony," Rodriguez said. "After last night's break-in and this morning's fake FBI agents, it's clear they're watching you." Vanessa looked up from her computer. "I have press credentials. I can get in separately and coordinate from inside." "I'm supposed to be picked up by military escort at the hospital tomorrow," Emma said. "That was the plan before all this." Rodriguez nodded. "Then that's where you'll be. We'll make sure you get there, safely, and you'll go along with their arrangements. They'll never suspect you're planning to expose anything." As they finalized details, the television broadcast interrupted with breaking news. The camera cut to a hospital where a frantic press conference was underway. "Catherine Reynolds, aunt of Emma Donovan, and sister-in-law of deceased hero Michael Donovan, has awoken from her coma and is making serious allegations against military officials," the reporter explained. The camera panned to show Catherine in her hospital bed, a bandage around her head, speaking to a cluster of microphones. "My home was invaded, and I was assaulted because we discovered evidence that Michael had uncovered a military cover-up," Catherine was saying, her voice weak but determined. This is about more than one heroic act. This is about years of silence and lives destroyed. Emma watched in shock as hospital security and men in suits suddenly swarmed the room, forcing cameras away. The feed cut abruptly back to a flustered studio anchor. It appears there's been some confusion at County General Hospital. We'll bring you more on this developing story as information becomes available. Rodriguez was already on his feet. They'll move against her immediately. She doesn't know about the USB or what we're planning, Emma said frantically. They might hurt her trying to get information she doesn't have. Vanessa grabbed her car keys. I'll go. My press pass can get me into the hospital. I'll make sure she's protected. I'm coming with you, Emma insisted. No, Rodriguez said firmly. That's exactly what they want. They're using her to draw you out. He placed his hands on Emma's shoulders. Trust Vanessa. We need to keep you safe until tomorrow. Emma reluctantly agreed, watching anxiously as Vanessa hurried out. Hours passed with no word. Rodriguez maintained a careful watch from the windows, occasionally checking in with security colleagues who had agreed to help them. Near midnight, Vanessa finally returned, looking exhausted but triumphant. Catherine's safe. I managed to get her transferred to a private room under police protection by convincing a sympathetic detective that her assault was connected to the Memorial bombing investigation. She smiled tightly. Having press credentials and a camera helped persuade him. Emma exhaled in relief. Thank you. There's more, Vanessa continued. Catherine's impromptu press conference has gone viral. The hospital incident is being described as federal overreach. People are asking questions, demanding to know what the military is hiding. So we already have public attention, Rodriguez said thoughtfully. Exactly. Vanessa pulled out her phone, showing them social media trending with hashtags like Donovan Truth and What Are They Hiding? The stage is perfectly set for tomorrow. Rodriguez checked his watch. Speaking of tomorrow, we need to get Emma to the hospital before dawn. The military escort will be expecting to find her by her aunt's bedside. As they prepared to move, Emma felt a strange calm settle over her. Tomorrow she would stand before the nation and speak truth to power, just as her father had tried to do. Whether they labeled him a hero or traitor no longer mattered. What mattered was the truth. He didn't know that the grenade was modified, Emma said softly, more to herself than the others. Hadid must have changed the plan without telling him. What? Rodriguez looked up sharply. My father, Emma explained. I've been thinking about it all day. He wouldn't have knowingly let dozens of people be at risk. He thought he could disarm Hadid with minimal danger to bystanders. When he saw the modified grenade, he made the only choice he could. Rodriguez's expression softened. That's what I'll always believe, too. As they headed for the door, breaking news flashed across the television screen again. Catherine was shown awake in her hospital bed, publicly accusing high-ranking officials of covering up war crimes and orchestrating the assault on her home. Emma stared at the television in shock as Catherine continued her impromptu press conference from her hospital bed. Her aunt's face was pale, the bandage around her head stark white against her dark hair, but her eyes burned with determination. My brother-in-law uncovered evidence of a massacre of civilians in Afghanistan that was deliberately covered up by high-ranking military officials, Catherine was saying, her voice weak but steady. Those same officials are now trying to silence us. The broadcast cut abruptly to the studio anchor, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. We want to emphasize that these are unverified allegations from Ms. Reynolds, who is currently recovering from injuries sustained during what police are calling a home invasion. Rodriguez was already on his phone. My contact at the hospital says federal agents are converging on Catherine's room. They're claiming national security concerns. Vanessa grabbed her camera bag. We need to move, now. If they're making these kinds of overt moves, they're desperate. Emma felt a surge of panic. What about the ceremony tomorrow? If they're willing to storm a hospital on live television, what will they do at the White House? That's exactly why we need to proceed, Vanessa insisted. They can control what happens in a hospital room, but they can't control a nationally televised ceremony without causing an even bigger scandal. Dawn found Emma sitting beside Catherine's hospital bed, surrounded by stern-faced military police. Her aunt had been sedated for her own health, according to the doctor who had arrived with the military contingent. The official story being circulated was that Catherine's medication had caused temporary confusion and paranoia. She'll be fine, the doctor had assured Emma with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just needs rest. Emma held her aunt's hand, maintaining the appearance of a concerned niece while her mind raced through the plans they had finalized during the night. The USB drive was now in Vanessa's possession. The journalist had already begun distributing encrypted copies to trusted colleagues as insurance. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Emma's military escort, a female lieutenant with a practiced smile. "Miss Donovan, I'm Lieutenant Carter. I'll be accompanying you to the ceremony today." She glanced at Catherine's unconscious form. "I understand your aunt is unwell. Please know the Army sends its sincere wishes for her recovery." Emma nodded, playing the role of the dutiful, unsuspecting daughter. "Thank you. When do we leave?" "A car is waiting downstairs. We have a suite prepared for you at the hotel adjacent to the White House, where you can rest and prepare for the ceremony." The lieutenant's tone was professionally sympathetic. "A selection of appropriate attire has been provided for your consideration." The journey to Washington, D.C. passed in a blur of polite conversation and subtle surveillance. Emma was never left alone, always accompanied by Lieutenant Carter or other military personnel who maintained a respectful but vigilant presence. The hotel suite was elegant and spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the National Mall. As promised, a rack of conservative dresses and suits awaited Emma's selection. On the bed lay a blue box containing her father's military medals and decorations, carefully mounted for display. "The ceremony begins at 1400 hours. That's 2 p.m., Lieutenant Carter explained. "The President's staff will brief you on protocol 30 minutes prior. Is there anything you need in the meantime?" Emma gestured to the medals on the bed. "I'd like some time alone with these, if that's possible." Lieutenant Carter nodded understandingly. "Of course. I'll be just outside if you need anything." The moment the door closed, Emma moved quickly. She unpacked the small suitcase Rodriguez had prepared for her, finding the hidden compartment where he'd stashed a burner phone. She sent a single text to the pre-programmed number. "In position." The response came almost immediately. "V has distributed packages to 17 outlets. R and team in place with MD badges. All systems go." Emma allowed herself a small breath of relief. Vanessa had successfully delivered evidence packets to 17 news organizations, and Rodriguez had gathered a group of security personnel who would be wearing memorial badges with her father's initials. She turned her attention to the prepared speech that had been left for her to review. A sanitized tribute to her father's bravery with no mention of his military career beyond basic acknowledgement of his service. Emma had memorized her own version during the night, a carefully crafted statement that would honor her father while revealing the truth he died to expose. As the appointed hour approached, Emma dressed in a simple navy blue blazer, reminiscent of her father's military uniform, but fitted to her teenage frame. She pinned her father's combat infantryman badge to the lapel, a small act of defiance against the carefully managed narrative. Lieutenant Carter escorted her to the White House, where they entered through a private entrance away from the gathering press. In a small anteroom, a harried protocol officer briefed Emma on the ceremony. "You'll be seated here, stage right," the woman explained, pointing to a diagram. "When called, you'll approach the podium from the left. The President will present the medal. You'll accept with a simple, 'Thank you, Mr. President,' and then you may deliver brief remarks. No more than 2 minutes, please." Emma nodded obediently, noting how the woman emphasized brief remarks while avoiding direct instructions on content. They didn't want to appear to be censoring her, but the expectation was clear. Through a window, Emma could see the White House rose garden being prepared for the ceremony. Rows of chairs were arranged facing a podium adorned with the presidential seal. Military personnel in dress uniforms moved with practiced precision, setting up the final details. A familiar face appeared at the doorway. Colonel Wilson, immaculate in his dress uniform adorned with rows of ribbons. "Miss Donovan, may I have a word?" he asked, dismissing the protocol officer with a nod. When they were alone, Wilson studied Emma carefully. "Your aunt made some concerning statements yesterday." Emma met his gaze steadily. "She's confused from her injury." "Is she?" Wilson's voice was quiet. "Because there are some who believe she might have been speaking from knowledge rather than confusion." "I wouldn't know, sir." Wilson maintained his scrutiny for a long moment. "I hope you understand that today's ceremony is about honoring your father's sacrifice, not complicating his legacy with unrelated matters." The implied threat hung in the air between them. "My only concern is that my father receives the recognition he deserves," Emma replied carefully. Wilson seemed satisfied with her response. "Good. It would be unfortunate if this momentous occasion were derailed by misunderstandings." As he turned to leave, Emma couldn't resist adding, "Colonel Wilson, my father always taught me that truth is never a misunderstanding." The colonel paused briefly, but didn't respond. At precisely 2 p.m., Emma was escorted to her seat in the front row. The Rose Garden was filled with military officers, politicians, and media. Emma scanned the crowd, spotting Vanessa among the press corps, her camera at the ready. Near the back, she glimpsed Rodriguez and at least a dozen other security personnel, each wearing the small MD badge they had created in Michael's honor. The ceremony began with the traditional pomp of military proceedings. A color guard presented the flags, followed by the national anthem. Various officials delivered prepared remarks about courage and sacrifice, none mentioning Michael by name until the final introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." The audience rose as President Harrington approached the podium. His address was eloquent and measured, speaking of Michael Donovan as emblematic of American heroism, ordinary people rising to extraordinary circumstances. "Today, we posthumously award Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan the Medal of Honor," the President announced, "our nation's highest military decoration in recognition of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." Emma was called forward. The President held the medal, a star suspended from a blue ribbon, with reverence as he recited the citation. Staff Sergeant Donovan distinguished himself by acts of gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as a security officer during the Veterans Memorial terrorist attack. When an assailant threw an enhanced explosive device toward a group of civilians, Staff Sergeant Donovan, with complete disregard for his own safety, positioned the device against his body to absorb the explosion, saving dozens of lives through his selfless act of valor. The President placed the medal in Emma's hands. Their eyes met briefly, and Emma thought she detected a flicker of genuine emotion beneath the practiced presidential demeanor. "Thank you, Mr. President," she said as rehearsed. She turned to face the microphone, aware of every camera trained on her, of Vanessa poised with her finger on her camera's shutter, of Rodriguez and his colleagues standing at attention in the back. Emma unfolded the small piece of paper she'd carried with her. Not her prepared remarks, but her father's faded note. "Everything I do for you." She took a deep breath and began, her voice initially faltering before finding strength. "My father died believing he was invisible to the world. In his own words, he was just a guy watching over people who didn't even know he existed." Emma held up the worn note for all to see. "Everything I do for you." Those were the last words my father wrote to me, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I didn't understand them then. I thought he was referring to his job, his daily sacrifice of working security shifts to support us. The audience was completely silent, captivated. My father was a soldier long before he was a security guard, Emma said. He served this country faithfully for 22 years, through multiple combat deployments. But what I've learned since his death is that my father carried a burden heavier than any medal. She paused, aware of sudden movement among the military officers in the front rows. Colonel Wilson was half rising from his seat, a warning look in his eyes. My father died acreditando que era invisível para o mundo, mas ele carregava segredo que o consumiu por anos. Segredo que ele finalmente decidiu que merecia morrer para revelar. Emma stood at the podium, facing a sea of stunned faces. The silence in the rose garden was absolute as she continued her speech, her voice growing stronger with each word. My father discovered that an operation called Silent Tempest, which resulted in the deaths of dozens of civilians, including children, was covered up by high-ranking military officials. Those same officials are here today, pinning medals on his memory while burying the truth he died to reveal. Murmurs rippled through the audience. In the front row, several military officers shifted uncomfortably. Colonel Wilson's face had turned to stone, his eyes fixed on Emma with an unreadable expression. The man who threw that grenade was Malik Hadid, Emma continued. He was an interpreter who served with my father's unit in Afghanistan. He witnessed the same massacre, carried the same burden of silence, and eventually broke under its weight. Camera flashes intensified as journalists realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Vanessa Chen moved strategically through the press section, quietly confirming to colleagues that evidence packets supporting Emma's claims had been delivered to their newsrooms. My father did not plan this attack, Emma clarified, her voice breaking slightly. But he suspected something might happen. He positioned himself where he could intervene because every proper channel he tried had failed. Every report was buried, every complaint dismissed, every journalist who might have helped was too busy or too cautious. President Harrington remained seated behind Emma, his expression carefully neutral, though his aides were frantically whispering in his ear. Protocol demanded that Emma's microphone should be cut, but doing so now, with every network broadcasting live, would only confirm there was something to hide. When my father saw that grenade, he made a choice that defined his entire life, to protect others no matter the cost. He didn't know it was a modified weapon with enhanced explosive power. That was Hadid's secret escalation, not part of my father's expectation. Emma unfolded a second piece of paper, a photograph of her father with Hadid in Afghanistan, both young and smiling, before the massacre that would change their lives. My father chose to transform a tragedy into a moment of redemption, not just to save lives that day, but so that we would finally pay attention to lives lost years ago. She looked down at the Medal of Honor in her hands, its gold star gleaming under the bright lights. This medal recognizes valorous action at risk of life beyond the call of duty. But what is our duty to truth? What is our duty to justice? My father believed those duties transcend uniforms, transcend orders, transcend silence. Rodriguez and the other security personnel had moved closer to the front, standing protectively at the edges of the gathering. Some military officials were on their phones, others in urgent whispered conversations. But no one moved to stop Emma. In his final video message to me, my father said, "Whatever happens, know that I love you. I wish I'd been a better father, been more present. Everything I've done, everything I'm about to do, is to build a world where the powerful can't just bury their mistakes along with innocent lives." Emma unfolded her father's crumpled note once more. "Everything I do for you." Now I understand that true heroism doesn't seek recognition. It happens when no one is watching, when there are no cameras or medals promised. It happens in the instinct of a moment, in the choice to place others above yourself. In the front row, an elderly veteran with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks slowly stood and saluted. One by one, others joined him. First Rodriguez and his security colleagues with their MD badges, then scattered military personnel throughout the crowd, until nearly half the audience was standing in silent tribute. My father was invisible to most of you until he died. Like so many who serve in uniform, or who work security jobs, or who stand watch while we sleep. People whose names we never learn until tragedy strikes. People who run toward danger while the rest of us run away. Emma's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. I ask not just for justice for my father, but for acknowledgement of all those who died in that village in Afghanistan. For honesty about mistakes made and covered up. For recognition of all the invisible heroes who surround us every day. She looked directly at Colonel Wilson now. The truth cannot stay buried forever, no matter how many medals we use to distract from it. For a moment, Emma thought Wilson might stand in outrage. Instead, the colonel slowly rose and, to the astonishment of everyone present, rendered a solemn salute. The president rose then, moving to stand beside Emma at the podium. His aides looked panicked, but he waved them off with a subtle gesture. Miss Donovan has raised serious allegations that deserve thorough investigation, he said, his voice measured but firm. I am directing the Secretary of Defense to immediately form an independent commission to examine the operation she referenced and all subsequent actions. A collective gasp went through the audience. This was unprecedented. A president essentially confirming potential military misconduct during a Medal of Honor ceremony. Staff Sergeant Donovan's heroism stands on its own merits, the president continued. Whatever we may learn about these past events does not diminish his sacrifice. If anything, it may reveal a man even more honorable than we understood, one who valued truth as much as he valued life. The ceremony concluded in a blur of activity. Emma was quickly escorted to a private room, where a team of presidential advisors waited, along with Colonel Wilson and several Justice Department officials. Rather than the hostile interrogation she had expected, she found herself being listened to with grave attention as she shared the full extent of her father's documentation. Within days, a special congressional hearing was convened. Emma testified, as did Catherine once she recovered. Vanessa Chen's expose ran in major newspapers worldwide, featuring the complete evidence Michael had gathered over years of patient investigation. The fallout was seismic. 3 generals retired abruptly. A former Secretary of Defense faced criminal charges. Families of the Afghan civilians killed in Operation Silent Tempest were finally acknowledged, with formal apologies and restitution. 6 months after her father's death, Emma stood at the site of the Veterans Memorial where Michael had fallen. The area had been redesigned to include a small plaza dedicated to the invisible protectors, those who serve without recognition or acclaim. Catherine joined her, both of them watching as workers installed a bronze plaque with Michael's name and likeness. Your father would be so proud of you, Catherine said, squeezing Emma's hand. I hope so, Emma replied. Sometimes I still wonder if I did the right thing. Some people still think he betrayed his oath by not preventing the attack. Those people didn't know Michael, Catherine said firmly. He prevented what would have been a far worse tragedy. He saved those children on that stage, just as he tried to save the children in that village years ago. Emma nodded. In the months following her revelations, she and Catherine had established the Michael Donovan Foundation, providing support for children of first responders killed in the line of duty. The story of Michael's sacrifice had become a catalyst for national recognition of invisible heroes, ordinary people making extraordinary choices without seeking glory. Rodriguez had become the Foundation's head of security, recruiting many of his colleagues who had stood with them during the ceremony. Vanessa Chen served on the board, using her journalism connections to highlight overlooked acts of courage across the country. The Foundation's simple motto, taken from Michael's last note, "Everything I do for you." As Emma and Catherine prepared to leave, a group of security guards working at the memorial approached, each wearing the MD badge that had become something of a symbol among security personnel nationwide. "Ma'am," one of them said to Emma, "we just wanted to say thank you. Before your father, nobody ever noticed us unless something went wrong. Now," he gestured to the plaza around them, where visitors were reading the plaques about Michael and other unsung heroes. "Now they see us." 1 year to the day after Michael's death, Emma visited his grave alone. Arlington National Cemetery had initially resisted his interment there, citing his civilian status at time of death, but the president's direct intervention had overcome the bureaucratic resistance. Michael's headstone was simple, but dignified, properly marked with his military rank and honors. Emma knelt before it, placing her father's old security badge beside the fresh flowers Catherine had brought earlier that day. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. "It's been a year. A lot has changed." She told him about the Foundation, about the congressional hearings, about the families in Afghanistan who had finally received acknowledgement of their loss. She described how security personnel around the country had adopted the MD badge as a symbol of pride in their often thankless work. "Remember when I said you were wasting your life watching over people who didn't know you existed?" Emma's voice caught slightly. "I was so wrong. They always knew you were there, keeping them safe. They just didn't have a way to say thank you until now." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby oak tree as Emma sat in contemplative silence. The truth about Operation Silent Tempest had not been easy for the country to confront, but healing had begun. Michael's dual legacy, as both whistleblower and hero, had sparked national conversations about moral courage and institutional accountability. "You know, Dad," she whispered, a soft smile forming on her lips, "you were wrong. They always knew you existed. And now, because of what you did, no one will ever forget."